warm welcome from my side. Today I'd like to get into a topic which is a little bit more dry than the other topics I've seen. So let's talk about data and how we can bring data to life, how we can use data to build an agile organization. So I'd first like to go into a small introduction. So how do we process data? How do we get data together? And then based on examples on what we can do, how we can use data. So first thing that we do is basically we need to gather data together. So what we do is we do not only use the information that you have about the workforce, so information, for instance, like the gender, like the birth date of employees, but you can also add additional data like employee surveys, how satisfied are employees, and then taking the next step, adding business information. So information about profitability, information about quality of a production, quality outputs there. So we opened a new dimension on how we can look at data. And then looking outside the company, basically, to look into the macro environment. So there we can include information about the population of a country. For instance, in Germany and other countries, we know exactly how many people live in a street. How old are they? What nationality do they have? What gender do they have? So this information, it basically allows us to do projections. So this way we can project the population. We know when people are roughly born. Then after they're being born at the age of 6 or 7, they enroll in primary school. Then they progress. Then it's decided to which secondary school they progress. So is it a high school? Is it Germany Realschule? And this way we can see in what kind of waves will pupils come onto the labor market. So we have the outside picture, what's happening basically in the macro environment around us. So that's basically the first step. We consolidated a lot of data together. What can we do with the data? So that's the second pillar that we actually need in order to make data into valuable assets for the company. So we have different instruments that we can use for analyzing the data. We have, for instance, here descriptive analytics. So that allows us to look into the past, what has happened in the past, and to describe the current state of a workforce. Then taking the next step, we have statistical analysis. So there we can explain why did things happen. For instance, what are the factors why employees are leaving my company? Why are people getting promoted? So that gives us already more of an explanation how things have happened in the past. And then look into the future. Here you can see simulations and projections. So that allows us to see what might happen in the next future years. Of course, predictions are predictions. They use assumptions, and they're never exactly 100% correct. But it will already give us an indication, for instance, what the workforce of the future will look like based on the current talent management strategy that has been implemented in the company. Then, when looking into the future as well, we use optimization algorithms, for instance, from the fields of genetics, where our bodies are constantly optimizing ourselves. We use that to project that onto HR. So when we look into the future, we want to have a certain workforce, certain combination. And then the question is, how do we get to that point? And therefore, we need to solve a quite complex puzzle. Which employees are getting employed, which employees will get hired in terms of a dual study program, apprenticeship, professionals, whom will we develop and who will be trained. So to solve that complex puzzle, we use optimizations basically to act or give us information how we have to act to achieve a certain state in the future. All right, then additional information, for instance here, rating algorithms. So if we don't have certain data available, we can use these algorithms to basically find, for instance, talents in the company. So who is the talent in my company? And if that information is not necessarily available, then we can use these instruments to extract that information. So what we've also done here for the simulations and the rating algorithms, for instance, the question, who is the talent? We ran this algorithm, and parallel, we also asked the organization. So all team leaders were being asked, who's the talent in your organization? And then we could compare who's the talent based on the algorithm, who's the talent based on the feedback that we got from the organization. And there we roughly got a precision of 90%. So the algorithm identified 90% of the employees. And there's a critical thing when it comes to data. It's still a statistical probability when we look into that. So we can't go back to individual employees. That's a critical point. For instance, Google, they have established an algorithm which basically gives the line manager the information who will leave in the next 3 months. So who of your employees, and it will give names. And they found out the algorithm is not bad. It's working to a certain precision, but still we identified 10% of the employees who won't leave the company, who wouldn't leave otherwise. So basically with this, they established a system where they approached the employees, and then based on that, even though they didn't want to leave in the first place, they left the company. So it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in the end. And there we have to be very careful that this is great information to work in a bigger context, to see the strategy, to identify problems within the workforce, but going down to individual employees, that's a step that is critical here. And then the third part here is looking into the future. How will we develop? So most companies, or I would say almost everyone, cannot predict the future. So we'll always have uncertainties. Technologies are changing nowadays a lot, and loads of different things are happening. So we have different scenarios that might happen based on the political situation, based on legislation. So we move away from saying we try to make the future, the prediction, better, but to say what different scenarios could happen and what kind of agility do we need in terms of the workforce in order to react to different scenarios. So that's more the key to say how can we be more agile rather than how can we improve our planning, which is also part of it, of course. All right, and the combination of the data and the methods, the instrument that you've seen here, that allows us to look into data in different ways. So basically, I give loads of examples here what we can do in the end with data. So one point is from the descriptive field. I showed you the example before how we can identify talents in the organization. So here you can see the talents, they are the purple people here, and the other employees, they are the white ones. And now we can basically look and create a picture of how the talent factory is working. So how are people being promoted? Here you see there is a distinction between different career levels. So here we have the entry level, the supporting jobs, and here at the top then the management. Here you see then the interaction with the external labor market. So people are coming in, are being recruited, people are leaving the company. And then here you see the composition, the architecture. And when we have a look into this, here you see employees are getting into the company. So roughly 19% of the employees are getting in here. They're being recruited. And then they move on. And here you see it's quite balanced. So talents are pretty much promoted at the same rate as the other employees. Well, I would naturally say, why do we not promote talents more? Because they are more capable of doing certain things. Anyway, when we come to the next stage, you see there you have a different picture. Here we have already established a certain pool of talents, and then they are being recognized at this stage by company programs, who is a talent, who shall be the next leader. And there you can see there's a distinction being made now. So more talents are being promoted every year to the next career level, which is the core level. So what happens here? Here you can see now a different picture. We have way more talents at that stage compared to other employees. But when looking into this, here you have one of the highest attrition of employees who leave the company. And when you're looking into this, the majority of the employees leaving here are talents. So when looking for the first reason, just from a descriptive point of view, you can already see why that might have happened. So here at this stage, you can see that talented or talents are not promoted to the same amount as other employees. And the reason basically in this company was that they are promoting based on company affiliation. So if you're here in this stage, after 4 years of being in that stage, you get promoted. Not based on how good you are, but based on how long you are in that stage. And that leads basically to a situation that talents are not getting promoted as quickly as possible. They have a stronger drive to develop within the organization. And here we could identify this bottleneck just using simple descriptive analytics, why people get stuck within the company. And then there are different solutions to tackle that situation. So basically, you could see that here at the initial stage, at the first career stage, too many talented employees were hired. So the company, they reduced the share of these employees being recruited, and this way they could relieve this bottleneck, and they also allowed more talented employees to develop to the next stage. Do you have any questions so far? Great. Then let's take the next step. Let's bring data together, which allows us to build an agile organization. So one of the keys here is information about the skills of an employee. What is he capable of in terms of technical skills? So what we do here is that we combine different data sources. It can be SAP data, it can be unstructured data sources, CV, etc., which are basically combined into one big data cube. And then we can extract the information, which employee is capable of Java, which employee is capable of other programming skills. So this way, within a very short amount of time, we can identify what kind of skills does an employee have. And there we use basically machine learning techniques. In the past, it was done in a different way. So SAP, they have a module, or My Success, where every employee can maintain their own skills. And we also did comparisons to that. So what we see is we have roughly 10% of an error margin. So we do not find a skill that an employee has, or we find one skill that he actually doesn't have. But the interesting part here is that this approach identifies 30 to 40% more skills. And we asked the employees why, when asking you, would you not state these skills? And they said, well, this was part of my previous job. I don't need that anymore, so I didn't state it. Which is quite interesting, because this way you can identify hidden skills which you wouldn't have unveiled otherwise, and you can draw a picture of the organization, what is available in the organization. All right, and once we've done that, you can identify, for instance, what's key knowledge for your company, what's important for your company, and then to draw different ways of creating a skill landscape. Where do you have knowledge available in your company? And then the next step, we'll come to that, how can we connect that with the company strategy, what's actually required? Here you see one of the skill maps. So what you can do is basically, based on the company strategy, you can rate the knowledge to say, is this knowledge that you won't need anymore in the future, so is of decreasing importance? That's what you can see here. The knowledge that is kind of stable, that will not change within the next 5 to 6, 7 years. And then to identify skills and rate them as such, which are of increasing importance. And there you can see already a kind of a picture of your organization, what's available, and where will you have future challenges. So let's have a look into, for instance, IT. Within IT, roughly 14% of the employees, they have skills of decreasing importance. Then the majority, 61%, they have stable skills, and another 25% have increasing skills. That's, by the way, also kind of a picture of the IT that we see in Germany. According to Bitkom, they say that roughly 15% of the employees currently employed in the IT area in Germany, they won't be able to be employed anymore because they have skills which are outdated and not required by the companies anymore. So sometimes all technology is still required to maintain the outdated IT landscape that some of the companies have, for instance, in the banking sector. And then the question is, what mistakes have been made in the past that we have suddenly such a picture that 14% of the employees have outdated knowledge? And one topic is that employees, they were employed for a certain technology which they were capable of. And then they were usually an expert in that field, so they developed to an ever highly expert level, and then they were also loaded with work, so they couldn't complain about not having enough work. And then suddenly the technology was not required anymore, and the companies are trying to offer them a severance package, which is a very highly unsatisfying situation that we have. So what has not been done in the past is that the alignment of where is technology developing into which direction, and what does the company require, and how can we transport that down to the employees so that they can develop. And a lot of examples, what we've seen now is that this is being made transparent to the employees. Where in most cases, employees, they want to work, yeah? They have an urge and they want to develop. But if they are not aware of a situation that what they are capable of, that won't be required in the future, then they cannot change with regard to that. So yeah, but this way, it's an excellent picture that can be seen. So for instance, in HR, every fourth employee has outdated knowledge. So they are not really required anymore in the future. And that is the first step in order to build a more agile organization, that we do not just rely on the skills that we have learned in the past, but that we continuously improve. And I'll show you a vehicle then in a few slides on how this can be done and how this process can be supported at the end of the day to build a learning organization. Right, here on the right side, you can then see which skills. So this is on an aggregated level. Here you have, for instance, big data technologies. There you have a lot of different more detailed skills like Hadoop databases, MongoDB. So this is aggregated then. And then you can see basically where is this knowledge available in my organization. Obviously, that's not correct data. It's fake data. But you can already get the idea to build a global skill landscape, what is available in different locations, and how can we utilize that from a strategy perspective in order to make use of the employees that we have, and then also to make sure that they can basically empower the business model, that they're empowered enough to support that. Yeah, you have different sources, basically. One, for instance, is your CV. So when an employee is maybe in the company for the last year or so, then it's quite valid to take the information that you have from your CV. Then you have, for instance, information in performance measurement systems, like you have a yearly evaluation with the manager. There things are being written down. So that's where we also can obtain information. And then, for instance, patents that have been registered. So when an employee register or came up with a genius idea that is supposed to become a patent, then often you have patent databases where you can see what is this patent about, specific technology, specific field, and there you can say this employee has specific knowledge in that area. And then you can also do a rating. Is it basic knowledge? Is it more advanced knowledge, expert knowledge? Because based on the vita of the employee, you can also trace back and make correlations. What has he been working with in the past, and how detailed can this knowledge be available? But it's not 100% correct. And then the next point is to look into the future. What can happen? How can the business model maybe change? And there we have a tool that is called HR ThinkBox. And here you can see, you can define different drivers which are basically impacting my business. So here, for instance, you have the information, how will my market grow? Will there be an economic crash in China? Will it continue like that? Or will it boom again? Then what will be my position compared to my competitors? How will my market share develop? And what kind of products will I sell in the future? So you can see that as an example also from it's actually from the automotive industry. So in the past, they have sold mainly hardware, the car, the iron that is behind the car, the electronics. So in the future that will change. So we have a higher share of software, which you can also see, for instance, in the mobile industry, that this is increasing. And then the last driver that we stated here is what kind of technology will be sold in the future. Will it be the fossil-fueled engine? Will it be a hybrid car, or will it be an electronic car? And all these things are impacting basically what kind of employees do I need in the company. So the one who can develop an e-motor, he does not necessarily have the same skills to develop a fossil-fueled engine. Totally different skills that are required here, for instance, when it comes to battery knowledge and so forth. And then also here in terms of being able to sell these products, what we see very often is that the sales force, they are not capable of selling software in a lot of companies. So this also has an impact and requires different skills at the end of the day. And then to say, what kind of scenarios can we basically assume for the future? When will it happen that we do not need or are not allowed to have fossil-fueled engine? And then we can define a best case, what we basically assume, what we can plan with, and then a worst case, what could happen. And this is being translated into how many employees do you require in the future and what kind of skills do they require. And then to see, you can see, for instance, when it comes to engineers, you could have a bandwidth that you might require 1,000 employees for the case that you assume. But in the best case, it could be 1,500. In the worst case, it could be maybe 900. So there you can see the impact of a worst case wouldn't be as dramatic as compared to the best case, where you do not need as much flexibility. But in other fields, you might require loads of flexibility, so that the scenarios are so different, which requires totally different skills. And then the question is, how can we grow an organization which is agile enough to basically being able to compensate for that agility required by the market? And how can we employ people, how can we develop people who are capable of being transferred between two different fields, two different technologies, etc. So that gives us the information, what will be required and how can we achieve that, how can we build the workforce capable of changing. So once we have done that, so basically now we know what will be required in the future in terms of employees, in terms of skills, and we also roughly know how we have to grow and to develop our workforce, how we have to build knowledge within the organization. And then it's basically down to tracking that. So you can go down to a very detailed level. For instance, here you see a senior system engineer. You can see how much money you have to invest into them in terms of trainings, development measures, roughly how much time it will take to basically achieve that situation where you have the necessary workforce available that you need. And how far you are at the moment. Here you can see the another 30% roughly missing in terms of the employees not having the perfect skills that you will require. And then you can go down to a very detailed level to basically track and trace the progress that you have made. Then let's take the next step. So now we basically know what kind of skills do our employees have. And then the question is, how can we use new ways of building a different way of how organizations work together? So in the past, we had organizations which are organized in terms of departments, in terms of highly complex organizational charts. And that leads to quite a lot of inefficiency. So if one department doesn't have enough work, these employees, they won't have as much work. Then there's another department which is on the other side having too much work. And yet again, if they would balance again, then they would have a balanced way of workload. So what we can do here is that we can get rid of all the organizational boundaries. So imagine we don't have an organizational chart anymore, but we only have skills available. So that's the one part. And then we have tasks what we need to accomplish, which requires skills. So here, for instance, you can see a project-driven organization, for instance, IT or software development, where you can see here you have different projects, and these projects you can translate them a year ahead using, for instance, neural networks into how many employees do you need for the project and what kind of skills are required. So having that knowledge 1 year ahead already allows you to basically do planning with regard to time. So you might want to shift a few projects because you might have peaks in terms of workload required, that at a certain month, for instance, you might require all the Java programmers because the project are not planned efficiently. And then the next point is, how can we staff then the projects? So we need to find employees who can basically run the project, who are needed in the project. And that is used or done using optimization algorithms. So basically, from this big skill clouds, it selects the employees which are required to run the project. And it also allows basically to develop employees using that approach. Because when you have an employee who has very basic knowledge, then you wouldn't staff them into a highly complex project where he would have to run independently. But first you would try to staff him or her into a project where someone senior is available to guide that process. And then here you can connect basically what will be required based on the strategy in the future and what do my employees currently have. And then these algorithms can staff the employees in a way so that they successively build their knowledge throughout this process. So what happens is then once you have staffed a project, the project will run. And then after the project has finished, everyone goes back into the skill cloud. And that's where the process starts again. They are available for new projects. So that has a few consequences. One way to live basically is that you only have two roles in the organization. So you have a manager and you have a project member. Sorry, a project manager or a project member. So you won't have a boss, a boss boss, a boss boss boss. You won't have that anymore. So employees are now what they are capable of, but not their title anymore. So imagine that in terms of change management. We did that in a few organizations. It has quite an impact that you're not the boss anymore, but that you might be a project member and the project leader might be your former employee who was working for you. And here you can, for instance, also see that these projects have certain priorities so that they are prioritized. Exactly, and there are some projects which is then considered basically in the optimization process, that some projects can be shifted in terms of time, whereas others, they cannot be shifted. So they have the higher priority. And with the ones who are not as important, they might come to the point where the algorithm basically is capable of identifying we cannot run these projects, so then they have to be deprecated. Yeah, also an interesting thing here is what we've seen in organizations in the past is that project managers, they have chosen the employees based on whom they knew from before, from a previous project. Based on other preferences, like also gender, what we have seen, that this was the criteria, how projects were staffed. And this is basically a way how this can be done in a neutral way. So it's simply based on the skills, availability, and not on what's your gender, what's your age, etc. So that's not considered in this. For instance, the location is one of the criteria that we consider in some of the companies where they say the location is actually very interesting and important for us so that they have a closeness. And others, in other organizations who are used to being, to working in an, in a global way, they do not have that criteria. But what happens here is the project manager doesn't have a chance to select. So it will be said, these are the employees that you get for the project. There's a way of how you can escalate that, of course, where he can say, no, that's actually not working for me at all. But the barriers are quite high to do that. So you have to go higher up into management in order to explain why these are not the right employees. That's basically one of the constraints that you use when it comes to the optimization. So some companies, they say it's really important for us that one client always gets the same employee so that they wouldn't change on a weekly basis. You know, this week it's employee A, the next week it's employee B, so that there is a constance basically within the project. So that can be all considered when it comes to the optimization, the assignment of the employees. So that's basically dependent then on the companies. Some people, they say, some companies, they say it's not relevant for us that they work together constantly. Others, they say it's highly relevant for us. So it depends a lot on the kind of business that you're in, the kind of branch, and also the customer requirements. One more topic is basically to jump into virtual space, which is also something very new to me, because one of our employees, he suggested, because he's a gamer, and he said these new things called virtual glasses, and we actually used that and developed our own analytics module for the virtual reality, which is, when you look into it, I don't know, who of you has used one of the virtual reality glasses so far? All right, okay. Basically, when I saw the videos on YouTube, I thought, that's really stupid. Yeah, what's the advantage of that? And then the first time that I also got to use that, virtual reality glasses, it's really amazing how you can see data in a different way. And that will be also, we've established that now in a couple of companies. They're working virtually together. So no WebEx or other sharing platforms that they're using, but you can actually be together in one single room where you can see the data, where you can touch the data together, and they're working across boundaries in terms of location is kind of a next step that we see, which is interesting. We just happened to stumble upon it. But very, very interesting, this technology, which we think will change also the way how we can work together across continents. So here, for instance, we have two settings. One is New York, it's a penthouse. So there you can overlook Manhattan, and then you suddenly have, like in Minority Report, then all the data available where you can put it together and turn time analyzing the data. And then suddenly a second person is in the room who's in a totally different location, but you can kind of see the person, and very interesting. And then, of course, a different setting, also a beach where you can just work with data on the beach on a daily basis. So we actually like that way of working together, very interesting. Another way on how we can compose and use big data, workforce analytics to compose a workforce architecture. So this is an example from a bank. You can see each dot here is a branch where customers can go, where they can do some consultancy, where you can get some money from the branch. And then we have banks have a lot of information about risks and so forth, a lot of requirements that requires them to collect a lot of data. So here you can see one of the data sources we've used is basically how did they achieve their financial targets, the branches. So here, the further you are on the right side, the more they have achieved this financial targets. And here you can see the customer satisfaction. So the ones here, they are really top performers. The customers are happy and the financial targets have been achieved. And here, then you see the ones who were not performing as well with regard to these two KPIs. And that was quite interesting to see that in the first place, so that, okay, you have more top performers, but you also have a few low performers. Now, we had a look into the workforce structure. So how the composition has the impact on these targets. Could you imagine a few reasons why, how gender, how age, how different factors could impact that? So the situation here was the low performers. Here you had mainly male employees below the age of 30 working full-time. Up here you had mainly female employees above the age of 45, and a lot of them working part-time. Interesting, isn't it? The stereotype would exactly state what you said. The younger, the more performance, the more technology-oriented they are, and it was the opposite. Basically, we could trace it back to one training that was implemented in that company. Let's talk about I'm not a psychologist, but let's talk about intrinsic motivation. So here, you had employees who were 45, they were quite settled, and their motivation was, I want to stay as long as possible in this company because I want to work in that company till I retire. Here you had employees who were very young, and the company, looking into the history, they had a problem basically recruiting new employees. So what they did is they said, basically, if you come to our bank, you will get huge bonuses. And how do you achieve these bonuses? How do you get them? By selling highly risked products to the customer. So unfortunately, these products didn't work out well. So the customers, they had problems with actually getting an advantage out of these products. So they got huge bonuses because in the training, they told them you can really get huge bonuses. And they had the motivation, basically, I'll stay within that company, I'll get loads of money for the next 3 years, and then I'll leave the company. And here you had the ones who want to stay long-term in the company, who are interested to consult their clients in a very stable way. And based on that, you could, first of all, get rid of the training that they had, and second of all, also change the composition of branches. So that's something that has been done in that case. So I think 5 branches, they were changed in terms of their structure. So they were equipped with more senior employees, mainly women, part-time. And then you could see after a year, here the customer satisfaction, it went up by 10%. The financial target achievement went up by 20 to 25%. So there you can see just the composition of how people work together can already change the outcome that you get. Yeah, and there are different examples as well. For instance, diversity can make a huge impact. So dependent on the function that you are in the company, sometimes when you look into the correlation, so how good is the performance of a team? So basically the same as here, and what's the share of the diversity share? Then you can see in some departments it has a positive correlation. So in that case, it meant the more women you had, the better the output was. For instance, in production, that production quality, where you can see that makes a big difference. And in other ones, it said the more women you have in a team, the worse the performance is. So that's quite important also to know when we talk about shares, that we should have a certain share of diversity within the company. The question is, it does make a change, it helps, but the question is, how do you apply that? And that's basically the key apart from just having thresholds of what's the average within each team that you should implement. And all these topics, then it also comes to Agile mindset. There you can see correlations that are relevant based on the structure that you have implemented within your teams. And not just in terms of diversity with regard to gender, but also looking into the educational background when you take the next steps in terms of how are these things impacted. All right. Well then, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the discussion. And I hope that you have a nice afternoon with the other topics and presentations then.